So we are going to continue to review ancient Egypt today. Today we are going to be continuing a talk about the ancient Egyptian dynasties. We talked about the Middle Kingdom last time. Now we're going to talk about the New Kingdom. All right, so the New Kingdom. When the New Kingdom came about, Egypt grew richer and more powerful. And Hatshepsut was one of the very few women to rule. Now, Hatshepsut was a very efficient and good ruler of ancient Egypt, in particular during the New Kingdom. Hatshepsut is pretty significant not only for being a woman, but because of how heavily her empire um, ruled based on a system of trade rather than conquest. So these traders exchanged beads, tools, and weapons for ivory, wood, leopard skins, and incense. So they would trade these items back and forth in order to make Egypt more wealthy rather than just standing on conquering other people. Trade made Egypt a lot wealthier. So Hatshepsut was a pretty successful pharaoh because she was able to make Egypt so much more wealthy with her trading. So Thutmose II was the pharaoh that ruled after Hatshepsut. So Thutmose takes a very different approach than Hatshepsut did. Hatshepsut was not quite as big on conquering. Thutmose III instead was. He conquered more lands, and Egypt grew richer from tributes. So tributes are kind of like, you tell me I will go over there and you need to pay me this money. It's kind of like protection money, sort of, but really you're forcing somebody to pay you money in order to not completely destroy them, right? So he conquered more lands. Egypt grew richer from these tributes, getting these other people to pay them money, and slavery becomes a lot more common. Slaves did have some rights in ancient Egypt, though. They could own land, they could marry, and they could potentially eventually obtain freedom. So, how was Hatshepsut unlike other pharaohs? She focused on trade instead of military conquests, very different from Thutmose III, who came right after Hatshepsut. All right, so the legacies of two pharaohs. So Amenhotep IV becomes Akhenaten, and he comes to power in 1370 BC. So he starts to change everything, really. He felt priests were gaining too much power, and he introduced a new religion with only one god. And priests who did not follow this new religion were removed from power. So, while the concept of religion with one God is a lot more common today with many religions that do so, like Judaism and Christianity and Islam, this was a pretty radical thing to do for ancient Egypt. The Egyptians were very religious, and their religion hinged on multiple gods. Amenhotep IV, who becomes Akhenaten, changes that. He introduced a new religion with only one god, and priests who did not follow this new religion were removed from power. If you do not follow the religion I am putting forth, you are in big trouble. Now, most Egyptians eventually refused to accept this new religion. And because of this, Akhenaten was so devoted to this new religion, he neglected his other duties, and he didn't act when the Hittites attacked Egypt. So, because he was so focused on this new religion he put forth, he was so preoccupied that he didn't act enough when the Hittites came and attacked Egypt, and Egypt's empire greatly diminished and lost a lot of power. So King Tutankhamun, we know him. Why do we know him? We know him because we found his tomb intact. He was the person who comes after Akhenaten. He was a boy ruler who took power, and he ruled for only 9 years before his death. And he died in AD 1922 is when his tomb was discovered. He was discovered fairly recently. I know 1922 is 98 years ago. That is still pretty recent to be able to find a totally intact tomb. This was a very big deal when it happened. And British archaeologists found King Tut's grave. So, what happened as a result of the removal of the priests? The priests were experienced in ruling Egypt. They were there for part of a reason, right? There was a reason why the priests were there. They were pretty experienced in ruling Egypt, and when Amenhotep, also who became Akhenaten, neglected his duties, the priests were no longer available to make important decisions, which definitely negatively impacted Akhenaten. All right, so the end of the New Kingdom. Ramses II was one of the most effective pharaohs of the New Kingdom. Many temples were built throughout Egypt, and temples were used for services. Now, most Egyptians prayed at home, and they believed the temples were houses for the gods and goddesses. So Ramses II builds many more temples throughout Egypt, while most Egyptians believed the temples were houses for the gods and goddesses. All right, guys, that is where we're going to stop for today. Please think about Ramses II for a second. We didn't talk about him too much here. But what you really do need to know is that he was a very effective pharaoh of the New Kingdom, and to some people thought to be the greatest pharaoh of the New Kingdom in regards of what he was able to get done. You're next going to be examining a poem that talks about Ramses II from the perspective of a somewhat modern day person. Modern day as in the 1800s in this case, but that is much closer to now than Ramses II was. So this poem is titled Ozymandias. It's by Percy Shelley. So please look at the assignment that is posted on Canvas next. In this assignment, you're going to be examining Percy Shelley's poem titled Ozymandias. Ozymandias is Ramses II. All right, thank you.